Hi everyone, welcome back to 33 Founders. I'm really excited that you're with us today because I'm here with Sahil Lavingia, the founder of Gumroad. Thanks so much for being with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Can we start out with you introducing us to Gumroad and explaining what it is and how it works?
Totally. So Gumroad is a tool that helps creative people, namely musicians, writers, designers, photographers, comedians, people that make things. We want to make it really easy for them to take their work and enable them to sell it directly to their audiences in the efforts of making a living. We just think that a world with more people making stuff is better.
And so how does it work? Let's say I'm a musician. How do I get onto Gumroad and use it?
Yeah, so you go to Gumroad and there's basically you add your product, right, which is you upload, for example, if you're selling a book, you upload a PDF, or if you're selling an album, you upload your MP3s, and then we give you a short link, just like Billy would, that you could basically paste wherever you happen to be engaging with their audience, right? So for a lot of people, that might be their blog or through their an email newsletter that they manage, or their Twitter account, or Facebook, or YouTube, or SoundCloud, or Pinterest, or Tumblr, or Instagram. And that's one of the really cool things about a link is it can basically go wherever you want. And Gumroad is super flexible. And nowadays, with like this sort of just the progression of the web, like a lot of the services will take advantage of like the rich metadata that we give them with like the price and the preview, and we'll sort of fill it in. And now we have a partnership with Twitter to do similar things. But yeah, basically you come to Gumroad, you say, hey, I want to sell this thing. You tell us what that thing is. You tell us how much you want to sell it for, and then we give you a link, and then you can go out and do it. And then every 2 weeks, you get a direct deposit in your bank account, and that's it.
What are the three things, Sahil, about Gumroad that really make it stick out as the best platform to use for online selling, especially in these demographics?
Yeah. So I would say number one is that we sort of fundamentally believe that the creator is responsible and should be the ones selling their products directly, right? So I guess the sort of topical word is self-publisher, right? Like we believe that not only should you be a musician, but you should be the one selling the music. And we think, sure, that might be difficult, stressful, hard, but like it's important for you to do that. And the costs are small compared to the benefits that you gain doing it yourself and being independent. So that's by far number one. Number two is we spend a lot of time thinking about how we do things in a very scalable way. And so there's a ton of functionality in Gumroad, but it's really important to us that like it's intuitive for anybody. And one of the really cool things about Gumroad is that we're building for creators of all different types of scale. And so sure, you might be a musician with a team of people that work for you, which is quite common, but like Gumroad needs to work for someone like my mom that wants to sell a recipe book, right? And that's cool because it means that we have a really simple but also powerful product that people can use. And then three, I think the economics are aligned with the creator, just like the sort of the first two things sort of influence the third, which is like we believe in, just like we believe in a product that works really well for creators, we also believe in economics that makes sense for creators. And if you're the one doing the work, sure, we might take our fee for like helping out, but it shouldn't be like, a marketplace where like that marketplace is actually taking probably the majority of the revenue. That's just not the way that we think about things. And so those are, three reasons that a lot of people use Gumroad over other services potentially.
You mentioned that an individual should really be in power of selling their stuff. And one of the ways you guys like to do that is by equipping them with analytics so they know who's buying their stuff, when, and how much. So on that end, you're big on sellers having really great relationships with their customers. How do you foster great relationships with your users, especially now that you guys have over 10,000?
Yeah, I mean, in the early days, it was definitely easier because there were very few of them. So you could kind of email them and be like, hey, what do you think? Right. It was if someone made, I remember the moment where like someone made even like $10,000 and I didn't know who they were. And I was like, holy, this is weird. This is like, I don't even know who this person is. And it was amazing. It was a great feeling, but it was like this, it was definitely like wow, I don't actually know who this person is or what they're selling. And now that happens all the time, which is really cool. But yeah, it makes it a little difficult to stay in touch. One of the things that I try to do personally is have 3 or 4 different reference points that all use Gumroad in very different ways. And so, for example, if we're building a feature, I I can talk to someone who sells a ton of stuff on Gumroad in a certain vertical, and then talk to someone who uses Gumroad in a very different way. It might be, you know, publishing their stuff in a very different way or putting it in a very different place. And, you know, it's kind of like, it's like triangulation, right? If it works for like 3 or 4 of these very varied use cases, it probably is going to work for everybody. And so that's kept me pretty honest, I think, about like, okay, if we build this feature and I run it by 3 people and it works really well for one, but not the others, like there's work to be done there potentially. And then in general, like one of the easy things about Gumroad is I really like the people that we're building this for, right? Like if I get to talk to musicians and writers and filmmakers and video game developers and people that make the things that I consume on a daily basis. And so it's really easy for me to get excited about talking to them. And that's important. You know, if I was building something for, you know, CPAs or something, like, not that I have anything against CPAs, my mom's a CPA, et cetera, but like, it's just not something that I wake up, you know, if someone's like, hey dude, I met this awesome musician, I get excited about that. And that only applies to certain demographics, I think, for me personally.
So you talk about getting excited, and something we touched on before we got started is avoiding that feeling of getting bored with what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that trait is characteristic of a lot of visionary leaders because they're never satisfied with the way things are. So when you get bored, one of the things you do is shift gears and start focusing on how you're going to manage the team. Tell us more about that and what it's been like as the team's grown.
Yeah, so, you know, when Gumroad started, I was kind of doing what I expected to be doing in the early days, which was just like writing code, designing software, kind of like what I was doing, you know, before I worked on Gumroad at all. And then things change when you start hiring people, and like these people have different opinions than you might on certain things. They might be better, they might be worse, but in general, they're probably just different. It's been interesting. I mean, I think that one of the things that like sort of took me a while to learn is like what leadership means, right? And so like leadership even today is like kind of a weird, like no one wants to call themselves a leader. Like anyone that wants to call themselves a leader should not be a leader. Like it's like one of those things where it's like, you know, the best way to make money is to not make money, right? Like, and it's sort of a weird sort of paradox. But in general, like the people that are leaders, I think, are just people that are able to say, hey, this thing is really important for you to go do. I have nothing to do with that equation, you know? And so with Gumroad, you know, and that's why I think it gets harder over time. Is like it's really easy for someone like Gumroad, even today, to get really excited because it's like, hey, you go talk to this user and figure out a way to make their life better. Like that's leadership, but that doesn't seem like if you told me like, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years ago, what leadership was, I would have probably thought about, you know, like the president of the United States or something. And he probably would agree with me today, where he doesn't feel like he's like, go do this, you go do this, you go do this, right? I think it's more about providing clarity and context to people that you trust versus like telling people what to do. That's like the least scalable way to do your job, I think.
And you guys have a totally flat organization, right?
Well, I wouldn't say totally flat. I use the term flattish, just because, you know, at the end of the day, like I am the CEO and no one else is, and so at least there's one level there, and so it would be, I think, a little bit just not true for me to say we're totally flat. But yeah, I think in terms of the way that we think about how we want to build a company going forward, it's really important to us that we like think about how do we stay as flat as possible for as long as possible. I think in general, and it's not about being flat necessarily. Like being flat is arbitrary for us. Like it's like the reason, like the things that are exciting are like I want to be able to hire people that work at Gumroad because they have an incredibly high amount of leverage, right? And so flat is a good way for that to happen. I would never work at a company where I didn't feel like I had good insight into what was happening everywhere if I cared. And not just like the fact that everything is open, like most companies nowadays, like great, you can like, everything is technically open. You could go find it. But like being able to find it easily is actually a very different thing. Making it accessible is totally different, right? And flat works really well for that. Like how basically what it means to me is like how can you be like a degree away from anything that you care about? Like it's not like, okay, I need to know about what this guy's doing over here, so I have to talk to my manager, and my manager talks to that person over there, and then like, you know, that person talks like, okay, he's working on this, and it kind of goes all the way back. Like that's not great. That's full of friction and inefficiency. So I think it's really just about empowering people. I also think it's about like people say like how, like and there's totally pushback that I get all the time of like, well, like having a manager is nice, like being able to grow and like telling you like how you get better and how you get over here in 2 years is useful. And I think those are things that one, I think there are ways to do that without a formal manager in place. Like one, just like me, I think I get better every day, but not because I have a manager, but because everyone in the company is helping me get better, and people outside the company and stuff like that. And so I think at a fast moving company, it's not as important because there's so much change just happening as a company in general. Like you don't really like your role doesn't need to evolve. It's like your role changes as the company grows. But then two, I think, yeah, I don't really know what my point was, but yeah, basically, I wouldn't say we're flat, but I think a lot of the things that are important to us, like definitely I would say the structure is flat. So one of the things that's really important to me is that I don't want people to feel like they have to report to other people just to do their job. Like to me, like everyone should feel like they're working at Gumroad. It's not like an us and them thing, right? Just like I feel like I'm working for Gumroad. People should not even feel like I'm working for Sahil who works for Gumroad, right? Their customer at the end of the day should be as close to their actual customer, which is Gumroad's customer, which is the creator. And I feel like that every day I wake up and I feel like my customer is the creator. But, if you're, a salesperson, you work for like a VP of sales, at the end of the day, your customer ends up being the way that you think about it, the VP of sales. I call it the boss's problem, which is kind of like when you pitch someone and they don't bite. A lot of the reason is like they're not really in looking out for the best interest of the company's customer. They're looking out for the best interest of their own customer, which is actually their boss, because their boss is kind of in charge for how much they get paid and if they get fired or not, right? It's kind of like enterprise sales, is similar. So yeah, those are kind of like a little bit of a rant on flat and why I think it's important. I think I also want to like communicate that like flat was not chosen because flat is absolutely better. It just happens to work for
you guys.
And the type of people that we hire, right? Like I'm sure Apple is not flat whatsoever, and they're worth $700 billion. So there's different ways of going about things, and I think round peg square hole kind of thing, right? Like you want to pick a solution that works best for you.
One of the things you mentioned that really stood out to me is that when you're working at a startup, things change so quickly that your role just changes as the company changes. Mm-hmm. And you get better as the company changes. You don't need someone to, necessarily help you with personal growth. Mm-hmm. So like you're not going to a conference or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you're not sending people to a conference. You just kind of do it together with the natural evolution of the company. What are some ways that your team works together to constantly be improving?
Yeah, I mean, one of the cool things about doing stuff that hasn't really been done before is you're kind of like things get thrown at you guys, at us a lot. So for example, like a very real example is in January 1st of this year, like the EU, the European Union introduced these new regulations around collecting value-added tax. And it sounds boring, and it is pretty boring. But it was basically this like entirely new way of like thinking about this problem, and no one had solved it before. Like it was kind of like everyone like was kind of flailing and being like, how do we deal with this? Like, and that was really fun because it took we have a lawyer in house now, so it took a lawyer, our comms person, our content person. I worked on the feature personally, 2 engineers, a lot of the other designers in the company giving us feedback. Like it took a lot of people to build this thing. And one of the really exciting things, to go back to the flat for a second, that's really exciting is, at the end of the day, when you work in a company that it's more like a triangle, and you're like this part of like, it's like say Pascal's triangle, and you care about like this part of your triangle, it's really hard for you to be like, hey, I can add value over here, because you don't even know that's happening.
You just get stuck, yeah.
Yeah, versus like Gumroad today, you could see like, oh look, like Sahil and Avi and Lee are working on that, and I have opinions on that, or like I have a friend who lives there, or I used to live there, I can add value. And it makes it a lot easier for that stuff to happen. And no one was really like product managing that, right? Like one of the other things that we have at Gumroad is we actually don't have any product managers. That role gets filled by whoever is basically doing the most for that feature, right? And it's cool because it empowers everybody to be a product manager of the things that they care about. So in that case, it was Avi, the engineer, that was working on it primarily. And he would within that sort of this triangle, like I was working for him. I would come in the office and be like, okay, what can I do for you, right? Like, you want to ship this feature, like, how can I help? Front end JavaScript or design, literally. And that's cool, I think, to be able to, like, he's probably like a better, like, I wouldn't say he was man. I mean, he basically was actually probably managing me, right? Like, in another company, like, he would be my manager, or my tech lead, for example. And I think it's cool to be able to give people that exposure, and growth that they might not have been able to get, even in a company that does have this very structured process, because they wouldn't have been in that position. So I think that's kind of cool as well. You kind of have this like rotation model, right? Where like in one context you're working for me on this feature, and then in another context I'm working for you, and then on this other thing. And it's kind of organic, and it's really scary and stressful sometimes because no one really knows. But I also think that's what's really fun.
Oh, it sounds really special, and it lends into, you mentioned the problem that came up on January 1st. You guys all got together to build a solution. And something you've said before is that if you think something's going to be hard, it's actually going to be a million times harder. So you said, if you would have known how hard it was to build Gumroad, you would have started earlier. Mm-hmm. How do you help people on your team grapple with that?
Well, I think one of the things is like setting expectations as soon as possible. I think this is another sort of affliction of the Valley, is that people expect hypergrowth all the time, immediately, right away. And things that are important, just like you should work on them because you believe that they're important, and that you believe that no one else is working on the same problem or the same solution in the way that you think you are. And I really believe that like Gumroad is one of the most important things that I could ever work on, that anyone could ever work on. And so it doesn't matter that like Gumroad isn't a $600 billion company today or something, I believe it's important for me to say this is a thing that I'm voting on with my time, and stress and what have you. And that's enough for me. And like, sure, that might not be enough for most people, but if you let people self-select themselves and say, hey, this is why I work at Gumroad, this is why I think you should be working at Gumroad. And if they're not excited about that, like, that's totally cool. But I think that's important, being like, hey, this is where Gumroad is today. This is our plan for the next 2 years. Hopefully it works. We have no idea. We have a little bit of an idea. And I'm sure that scares people away, but I think it draws people that are excited about that a lot closer. And it's a lot easier too. Like, my nature in general is to like tell everybody everything, like the good and the bad, and just be like pretty upfront about it. And everyone probably says that, but I really am like, I like talk in public rooms. I don't really use one-on-ones that much. Like, I think it just makes me better if I'm like sort of constantly held accountable for all of my actions and stuff like that. I think I actually do a better job. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, so communicating just up front, like, this is what we think growth will be like at this company, is helpful. I don't tell anyone like Gumroad is going to grow,
because you don't know
100% month over month for the next 2 years. Like, that's just not going to happen.
When it comes to that growth, my friend Mike just wrote a really great post about founders needing a playbook when they're working to scale, not a set plan. So you want to have a responsive culture who can adapt to wherever you are, instead of an efficient culture that's just going to repeat the same plan every time. How do you use a playbook to guide your work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the axioms of a playbook are values, right? So I would say the original playbook for a company is probably what their cultural values are, right? So for us, it might be something like one of the sort of paragraphs under one of our values is like be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like, that's incredibly important to us. Is that everyone should kind of be on edge all the time. And one of the things, I think Zuck said it, was like, your cultures or your values should actually be quite alienating to most people. Like, otherwise it's not worth having them. Like, most people should read them and be like, I never want to work here. This place is weird. And so that's one of them. People are like, well, you like being uncomfortable all the time? I'm like, no, I don't like it. I just think if I'm in a place where I'm uncomfortable, I'm probably doing more interesting things and I'm becoming a better person. That's like saying, do you like going to the gym? Like, no, I hate it. I hate it every time.
I hate it so much.
However, I still think it's better to go than not go, right? And so that's sort of part of the point of that value specifically. But yeah, I think that's just what was the original question? I forgot where I was going with this thought.
Where you,
Playbook.
yeah.
Playbook, yes. Um, yeah, so I think that's like the start of it is like, you figure out like, okay, these are the things that are like fundamentally important to us and we will never bend on, right? Like we will never take the easy way out if we know it's not the best way out. Things like that. And those will influence like, then you have like sort of like the degree above, which you might have a playbook. We don't literally have any playbooks really at Gumroad, but like, like
There's that mindset.
like a mind, yeah, we have like, a mindset and like how we approach engineering like is going to be based off that. Like, for example, that value can turn into an engineering specific value that might be like, be okay, Facebook's famous for like move fast and break things, right? Like be comfortable being uncomfortable, and like shipping code that might not work perfectly is really uncomfortable. That's a scary, like that's definitely takes some getting used to. And they've taken that value and sort of, and then that might be even more specific to like the front end engineering team, and it kind of goes up and up and up, right? And so like ideally the values are, I mean, sort of by nature of them being fundamental, like should work in they're like laws of physics, right? Like they should work in every context. Doesn't matter how big, how small, how far away, like the reason they're laws is because they're unequivocal. And like, I think in every situation, like being comfortable with being uncomfortable is better for you and your growth and the company and Gumroad, right?
When you put it that way and you explain some of your values, one of them that you're never going to take the easy way out. Let's say I'm coming in to potentially be hired at Gumroad. Mm-hmm. What are a couple of the values that you're going to tell me about how things work and the kind of culture that I'm going to come into?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing we do actually with every candidate that we hire is we tell them upfront exactly what our values are. So every single one of them you'll know, and there's not that many. But for example, like the first one is align, right? Like, and it's cool because sort of meta to that value specifically, like Gumroad Inc. should be structured in a way that makes Gumroad the product better, right? Like just like we're flat because our product is flat, and the way we think about how parts of the product work with each other, sort of the organization should kind of mirror that, right? And that's a part of alignment. Our fee, the fact that we take 5% is an embodiment of that value. The fact that we want to be aligned with our creators. But then it also extends to like, you should really work at Gumroad because you feel like you are aligned with Gumroad. You shouldn't work here because we gave you the highest salary, which is probably not true. You shouldn't work here because, I don't know, other reasons. Like you really should work here because you really believe in Gumroad's vision. And for some people they're like, why would you say that? That's obvious, but it's not always obvious. One of the values is smile, right? Like it's important to me that I have fun, and sure it's uncomfortable and stressful sometimes, but like at the end of the day, like I'm really excited to be doing what I'm doing, and I'm also in a really great position to be doing what I'm doing in like an awesome place with awesome people, solving an awesome problem, working in an awesome office, like all of these things. Like my life is so much better than the alternatives, right? Potential alternatives. And so like appreciating that and being like, if you have a shitty day, like realize like it's still a pretty awesome day, right? Like your bus was late or something. Like it's still pretty good. And so in general, that's like, we say smile like that, people might sort of take that and it might mean humble to them or whatever. I don't really think you can have a value called humble because that kind of goes against the word. But for me, it's more just about being like appreciative, like happy-go-lucky and carefree, and like not thinking too much about like, oh, I messed that up, because it's like, well, it's the past, it's already happened. Like there's no real reason to be mad at it, right? Just like think about the things that you can impact, right? Get mad about things you can actually have an influence on, because there's no point in getting mad about things you can't change.
One of the things you shared is that it can sometimes be stressful. What's one of the scariest things that's happened to you since you started running Gumroad?
Let me think. I mean, every time, at the end of the day, I wouldn't say it's like there are moments of it. It's really more like just like a sort of like memory, like a layer. It's like kind of always there, like, every day. I know, maybe that's worse, but every day, like, people are making their livings on Gumroad. Like they use this service that it is up to me and us to maintain and keep around, right? Like there is a future in which Gumroad doesn't exist. That is really fucking scary to me, right? And that's something that hopefully won't ever happen. But like it's the fact that that responsibility and I'm accountable for that. This thing that a lot of people use, like
To live. That's intense.
that's a little, and like I mean, I would never be like look at statistics, base your future on statistics, but like statistically, like most startups fail. Most companies in Gumroad's position today will not work, and that's like kind of it's weird to. I can't grasp it. Like I can say it, but I don't internalize that whatsoever. I can't imagine a future in which Gumroad doesn't actually exist. That's absurd to me. We're just too awesome, but statistically that's what the data says. And so that's like, a little scary, and like you have to definitely sort of keep that in mind. And then in general, like scary, like as the company grows and we hire more people, like realizing that like I'm going to work at Gumroad for, and this is probably the most scary thing, like, so I'm going to work at Gumroad for indefinitely, let's say, right? Like minimum the next 10 years. And every single decision, minute, small, massive, our office location, the snacks we have in the office, the words that we use to describe certain things, when we do certain events, do we do happy hours on this day or that day? Do we do them every week or bi-weekly? Or all these subtle, small things affect, like, I really believe in chaos theory and like the sort of butterfly effect, right? Like one small change, rippling effect sort of thing. And I think the value of all of the, or not the value necessarily, but the impact of every small thing is much larger than you'd think from first glance. And so that's always scary. Like every day I wake up and I'm like, I made 100 decisions today, or I'm going to make 100 decisions today. And every single decision is altering like the future of Gumroad and the future of just inherently by me working there, like my future. And if I make a decision, it either made it better or worse. Every single decision I make, I'm not consciously aware all the time. I would go insane. But like, yeah, like the fact that we decided to call them products and not projects, or creators instead of sellers, or where our office ended up locating, or the fact that we really don't want an elevator, like we never want to take an elevator to work. Like all of these things seem small, but they have massive, I think, repercussions over time. And a lot of them will never be identifiable, but that's scary to me. Just I wouldn't say scary, like, there's like scary in the sense of like I think when people say scary, like
Keeps
a lot of
you
times,
awake.
yeah, they assume like dangerous.
Oh.
Like for me, like a roller coaster is scary, right? But it's not scary because I actually believe I'm in danger. It's scary because it's like this new feeling that my body's not used to. And I think that's like scary, is like I'm not used to like making decisions that I think might have pretty big impacts pretty big impact on like my future all the time. Every decision I make, every word I use, it's pretty weird.
That's intense. My heart's racing over here. One of the ways that you deal with that, you shared in previous interviews, is you look up to people who are doing really well and you try to adopt their habits. Who are some people that you really look up to?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because it's changed a little bit actually since then. I think like I used to look up to like the sort of canonical famous tech people. And I think now, and maybe that's just a like fortune of now knowing people like that and actually becoming friends with them. But I actually just like think of and get really I can say the really cliche answer, which is my creators, right? Like I love looking at the creators, and they are businesses. A lot of them are entrepreneurs themselves. So it's really cool to see them and how they tackle problems and how they deal with stress and how they deal with prioritization and stuff. But then also just like being friends with people that are in a similar stage than I am, or like a little bit ahead of me. That's been really interesting, to not get a sense of like, yeah, it turns out it's really easy to drive a shitty car when, like in a situation where you don't have to worry about all these other things or whatever, right? Like it's really easy to eat healthy. Like this is a common one. It's like, wow, like I remember I saw this article that was like, wow, all these Bill Gates and friends, like they all eat super healthy. That was like a massive thing. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's pretty easy to eat healthy if you have time to eat healthy, but a lot of people don't have time. And so it's like this weird thing where it's easy to like look at the habits of these very successful people. And I'm now more excited about, well, how do people in my situation where they actually don't know if they work an extra hour or two, is that going to have an impact or not at all on the world? Like, how do they react to that? And so I'm trying to do a better job of spending time, like I met up with a friend, Brett, who works at a company called Remind recently, and just getting like, even like minute things, like how did you deal with like an office redesign, or like where did you pick where your office is, or like how do you think about who you were raising money from, what was most important to you? Like these things I think have just helped me think through a lot of these things. Also, just being like, man, this is really hard. You know, a little bit of it's like patting each other on the back sort of thing. Like, this is hard, and someone's like, yeah, I know, it's really hard. And I'm like, yeah, it is really hard. It's just like nice to be able to do that sometimes.
I want to end with one of the great quotes I've heard you share about your journey. You said, I didn't want to be replaceable. I wanted to invent.
Mm-hmm.
Today, as you're working at Gumroad, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it means that you want to be, you know, like you want to be spending your time contributing, creating something that if you weren't doing that, it wouldn't have happened, right? Like I think that's pretty important personally for me is like if I wasn't working on Gumroad, I really believe that no one else would be building Gumroad. And that's scary to me. The fact that wouldn't have happened. Um, you know, like if you are working at a company and you feel like you could quit tomorrow and they would find someone else to do your exact position, like to me, like that's just not that fun, right? Like to me, I mean, you could take the extreme view and be like, well, that person should have been replaced by a computer if it's really that replaceable. Like, I mean, and that probably is the inevitability is like a lot of these roles are actually being replaced by technology and software. Um, and then in general, like I think invent is like a hard word because people kind of automatically associate that with like electricity or something like that. Like you invented X, right? Like amazing. And it's I think for me it's really about like something didn't exist and now it does. And it doesn't have to be a cool new thing. It's just like this thing, this new idea, this new thought, this new way of thinking about this thing was, uh, this new song, whatever it is, like this, it now exists in this form that literally in the, like the best knowledge that we have about the history of humanity and the universe, like has never, existed, which I think is kind of crazy.
The way we close all of our 33 Founders interviews this season, Sahil, is focusing on uncertainty. You've explained it a lot today with your team and just with yourself. Can you share a couple of the really memorable experiences you've had by shipping something early or doing something that you weren't 100% sure about that really paid off?
Yeah. So one of the things that, and this is one of those, a good example also of like just like something that I thought was going to have very low impact that actually like significantly probably altered the future of the company.
Oh, wow.
It was actually like it was like Sunday at like 2 or 3 a.m. or I guess Monday at that point.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
And I was just cranking on like it was just actually I think Gumroad was just me at the time or like 2 or 3 people max, and I was just like I found out that you could have transparent backgrounds on iframes. Like I don't know, I just like realized this, and I was like, wait, this is powerful because I had this issue where I wanted to embed a Gumroad product within somebody else's website. But if I did that by actually like taking the HTML and pasting it there, like all of the styling and stuff would apply to it. Whereas with iframes, that doesn't happen. It's kind of exempt from those rules. It's kind of its own box within the website. But the problem then is like, well, then you have this box in the website. Like it doesn't really feel like it's part of the website or whatever, right? It covers up whatever was behind it or next to it or whatever. And so I did some research and I found out that you could make transparent iframes. And so what I built really quickly was just like this prototype where you would basically like go through and look for all the links of Gumroad that would link to Gumroad, like a Gumroad product specifically. But instead of when you would click it, normally it would just take you to that website, right? It would take you to gumroad.com/whatever the URL of the product was. It would actually open it up in line. So like a little pop-up would show up and it would look in line, but really what it was doing was overlaying a window that had, that was invisible. I had a transparent background and then had a product within it. And so now you can see like Stripe Checkout, us, a bunch of people, but that was the first time anyone really had done that in any way that was public. And that was just like a random, I found out that you could do this with one line of code and I built this thing and now double-digit percentages of Gumroad's revenue or volume flows through an overlay. We call that feature now the Gumroad overlay, where you can basically embed one line of HTML, and this JavaScript will basically do that. It's a lot better now
than at 2 a.m.
than it was back then, but that was something where like I pushed out and I was like, this is kind of weird. Like I don't know if people are gonna like it. It's kind of this weird way to like hijack behavior, but like it worked really well. And I'm pretty glad that I did that.
Good that you went with your gut. Well, thank you so much for being with me today. Can we close with you sharing how people can follow Gumroad and stay up to date with you?
Totally. So to follow Gumroad, you can just follow Twitter, our Twitter account at Gumroad, Gumroad, and I'm on Twitter at SHL.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.